Hey guys, Mr. Champlin here. Today we're going to be talking about the classification of fish, so how we group fish. So there are actually three main groups. There are the jawless fish, and the class name is Agnatha. There are the sharks and their relatives, and their class name is Chondrichthyes. And then we have the bony fish. Their name is Osteichthyes. Now, ichthyes, I should mention, just means fish. So if you're an ichthyologist, and they do exist, these are people that study fish. All right, so let's talk first about the agnathans. Now, the agnathans are the jawless fish. And as I mentioned in the previous PowerPoint, there was a time when all fish were jawless. But once fish evolved jaws, it turned out to be such a handy tool that the jawed fish became very successful, and most of the jawless fish went extinct. There are a few exceptions, however. There are two small groups of jawless fish that still exist even now. And the first one is the hagfish, and this is the hagfish right here, very odd-looking creature. And the other is the lamprey. So those are the two jawless fish that are still around. So the hagfish lives in very deep water. If you were fishing, you would not catch these. They live at the very bottom of the ocean, in some of the deepest parts of the ocean. And they basically feed on dead things that have fallen to the bottom of the ocean. Now, they have a very interesting way of feeding. Again, because they have no jaws, they're not able to tear flesh off a carcass very easily. So what they do is they actually tie themselves into a knot, and they use that as leverage to kind of pull flesh off the carcass. So it's a little bit hard to describe. I strongly recommend that you look up hagfish on YouTube, and there's a lot of great, really quick videos that show you what they're all about. They're really fascinating. One of the more interesting things about them is that to defend themselves, they have evolved this method where they produce lots of thick mucus. And so, again, it's hard to describe, but if you saw a video, you would be impressed. Think of like the thickest, it's almost like Jello, all right? And they're able to excrete it from their bodies like very rapidly. And so let's say you have a hagfish and a shark goes to bite the hagfish. It excretes this stuff, and the shark just gets a mouthful of essentially unflavored, Jello, and no hagfish. So the hagfish is able to escape. Oftentimes, the predators of the hagfish will actually die because this thick mucus gets caught in their gills, and they'll actually suffocate. So this is probably one of the reasons they've been able to survive for so long. The second group of jawless fish that still exist are the lampreys. And these lampreys, again, they don't have jaws, but they do have teeth-like structures, and they'll use these teeth to cut through the skin, and they're fluid feeders. So think of these as like the fish version of a leech. Now we've already talked about leeches. Obviously, leeches are worms, and lampreys are not worms, but they feed and look very similar. These are found in the ocean. They've also live in some freshwater. We don't have to worry about it around here, but they have managed to, penetrate and live in the Great Lakes, and they are afraid that they are going to spread throughout the United States, via the Mississippi River. So this is a problem because, they will attach to and feed on other fish and mammals and even people. So here you see a lamprey that has attached to a fish, and it will remain attached for a while, and it will basically, cut through the skin and feed off the blood until it's nice and fat, and then it will fall off, much like a leech. Here you can see a close-up of the mouth and the teeth that it uses to actually gnaw through the skin and to get access to the blood vessels. So you wouldn't want one of these things biting you. So Again, they don't live around here, but they do live in the Great Lakes, and some people actually have been bitten by these. So imagine if you were swimming and then all of a sudden one of these things attached itself to you. Would you stop and pull it off and maybe perhaps drown, or would you just keep swimming until you got to shore? So again, I highly encourage you to look up some YouTube videos about this. Really cool stuff that shows you how these guys operate. All right, the next class of fish is the chondrichthyes. And again, these would be they and their relatives. So what's special about these? Why do we have these guys in their own separate group? Well, they have a they have a skeleton made out of cartilage. So they don't have a bony skeleton. So like, think about places in your body where you have cartilage, like your ears and your nose, right? They're kind of flexible, but still, somewhat stiff. So their entire skeleton is made out of cartilage. They have no bones. And as most people know, they have replaceable teeth. So here you see it has some teeth here. These teeth will eventually fall out, and there's teeth kind of behind those teeth that kind of move forward. So they always have sort of these readily available sharp teeth to capture and kill prey. What's also interesting about these guys is that if you look at their skin under a microscope, they're actually covered in these tiny teeth-like structures. So they look very similar to the teeth that are in the mouth, but they're, of course, microscopic. They're much, much smaller. We've also mentioned already that most of these guys, not all, but most of them, they have to keep swimming in order to breathe. So in other words, they have to constantly keep a flow of water over their gills as they swim forward. If they stop or go backwards, they will eventually suffocate. Here is a picture of a tooth, and this is shark teeth are actually one of the most common fossils found in the ocean. So because sharks have so many teeth and they lose them constantly, and of course they have many more to replace them, these teeth actually fall down to the bottom of the ocean, and many of them eventually become fossilized. So you can actually buy fossilized shark teeth for like 50 cents a piece. They're such a common thing. In fact, they're one of the more common fossils in the entire world. Now, if you wanted a fossilized megalodon shark tooth, you're going to have to pay more, but they do exist. I'm not sure how much those cost. It might be a couple hundred, but again, pretty common fossils. All right, so let's talk about the members of this group that are not sharks. So everyone's heard of sharks, and you know sharks come in all sizes and shapes, but there are two other major groups that are within this group of the chondrichthyes, or the fish with skeletons made out of cartilage. And the first one that I want to mention are rays, and you probably have heard of or seen manta rays in videos. If you go to many aquariums nowadays, many of them have ray tanks where they have smaller rays. Usually they're about a foot or 2 feet across, and they'll swim in a large pool, like at a large above ground pool, and they'll swim in a circle, and they actually enjoy being petted or touched by humans. And so they will kind of rise up and kind of rub up against you if you have your hand right in the water. So that's a really cool thing. So if you ever go to like an aquarium, make sure you check that out. So rays, they actually swim through the water, and they're filter feeders. So they have this weird looking mouth, and they kind of just allow the water to enter their mouth and go up the gills, which are hard to see here, but they're on the side. And as the water goes through the mouth, they will filter out plankton and microscopic stuff. The really large manta rays can be I think 12 to 14 feet across, and they're big enough and sort of good natured enough that divers can actually ride them. You can kind of like get on their backs and sort of be carried by them. Not many rays around here, but we do have lots of skates. And so skates, again, kind of a similar shape to the rays, although more of a diamond shape here. And these are actually quite common off the coast of Massachusetts. If you were to go to the beach and you were to find a mermaid's purse, which is an egg from a shark, or its relative, it's probably an egg case for a skate. And so skates are very, very common. And when I used to bring my students in May to the Rocky Beach for our field trip, we would find these mermaid purses scattered throughout the beach, and even occasionally we would find a dead skate. So very, very common. These guys actually are able to stay in place at the bottom of the ocean. They often cover themselves up so that just their eyes are kind of peeking out, and then they wait for prey in that manner. All right, the third and last group, the osteichthyes. And what makes these different? Well, these guys have skeletons made out of bone. So osteo means bone, right? And ichthyes, of course, means fish. So these are the bony fish. So a good way to remember this is if you have osteoporosis, it means you're getting holes in your bones, right? Your bones are getting weak. Now, not only do they have skeletons made out of bone, but they also, their scales, which cover not all, but many of these bony fish, they are really small, but they're also made out of bone. So again, when we talked about the early fish having these big bony plates on the outside to protect them from predators, these scales have got these big bony plates have gotten smaller and smaller over time, and they sort of evolved into scales. So still gives them some protection, but obviously makes it easier to move and do what they have to do. Now we can take all the bony fish and divide them further into two groups. So we have the ray-finned fish and the lobe-finned fish. Now the lobe-finned fish are not as common. If you look at them, they have what looks like sort of almost like legs before their fins, right? So these are the lobes that we're talking about. This particular picture is a drawing of a coelacanth, which is a fish that that was thought to be extinct, and until they captured one in like 1910. Somebody was fishing off the coast of Africa in really deep water, and they caught one of these, and it just blew away the scientific world because they had thought that these fish were extinct, and they knew them from fossils, but they thought they had been extinct for millions of years. So there's not a whole lot of lobe-finned fish as in terms of species, but they are still around, and it's thought that the amphibians and thus all vertebrates that live on land probably evolved from the lobe-finned fish. Now the other group, which is much, much larger, and these would be fish that we're more familiar with. These are the ray-finned fish, and their fins will contain little rods of bone, and so that when you eat a fish, right? Sometimes they have little bones in them, and this can come from these from their fins. So like goldfish, salmon, all the fish that we would typically eat, flounder, cod, all of these would be ray-finned fish. So the vast majority of all of the bony fish would be ray-finned fish. And lastly, I just want to mention that, again, these ray-finned fish are very common, and they come in all shapes and sizes. So kind of just to give you an idea of some of the more exotic fish that are out there. So the oarfish, which again, if you look at my video, these are really cool. These are thought to have been given rise to the legends of sea serpents, because these can grow to be like 30, 40 feet long. They get really long. They're really sort of skinny. And you can see why people would have been really freaked out by them. Some fish are able to produce light, and they live deep in the ocean. Some fish have giant mouths that enable them to, eat prey that's even, bigger than they are. So again, we're familiar with a small number of fish, typically the ones that we eat or we have as pets, but fish come in all shapes and sizes, and there are many, many different types. All right, so I hope this was helpful. Make sure that you answer the questions on fish classification.